Technology is the new firewall, where human insight trumps every trick. We're not hacking systems, we're hacking behaviors so you won't click. No complicated code, just tried and true brain science at play. Social engineering for good, the best defense is in your mind today.
Welcome to Phishing for Answers. The opinions expressed here are solely those of the individuals involved and do not reflect the views of their employers. Get ready, because the next live episode of Phishing for Answers is starting right now with your host, Joshua Crumbaugh, the CEO of Phish Firewall.
Psychology is the new firewall, where human insight trumps every trick. We're not hacking systems, we're hacking behavior so you won't click.
All right. Hello and welcome to another episode of Phishing for Answers. Today, I've got Niel Nickolaisen, the CIO of Utah State. Hey, Neil, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Joshua. I appreciate that. Niel Nickolaisen.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. It happens all the time. I have spent I'll start early. Early in my career, I was a lean manufacturing person. I was a VP of operations for a medium-sized, 600 million-ish consumer packaged goods company. While still optimizing supply chains and improving processes and trying to do things better, my primary focus was complaining to the rest of the company how bad IT was. And so one day, after a particularly bad incident, I went to the CEO and I demanded that he make a change in the leadership of the IT organization. And his response was to make a change by making me the leader of the IT organization. And so I've spent the last 20-ish years doing a series of IT transformations and turnarounds. And that has covered the spectrum: modernization, software engineering, product development, improving cybersecurity, posture and status. So I've had an amazing and wonderful career across a range of industries and verticals, pretty much everything except healthcare and financial services.
So you loved technology and never looked back?
It's been, the thing I love about it is I'm always learning. Things are always changing. I consider that heated 5-minute argument with my CEO back then the best thing that happened to me in my life. So when any young person starting on their career asks me for my career advice, I said, be bitter and be angry, and it'll all work out for you.
Be bitter and be angry. It's funny. All right. That's a wild story. That's actually the first time I've heard that specific path into technology, but exciting, fascinating stuff. So you're currently in higher ed, and I imagine higher ed probably has a little bit more drama around AI and large language models, even than the rest of the world. And there's plenty of drama everywhere, but am I right about that?
Well, I think in higher ed, there are kind of two avenues for AI, and Gen AI in particular. That is, what's its impact on how you approach education? And then the same enterprise impact that any other organization has. How are we going to use AI? How are we going to use LLMs? How are we going to use Gen AI? Just in improving the technology of the organization. And so both of those aspects we get involved in because one of the other characteristics of major portions of higher ed are that they're somewhat decentralized, meaning a department, a college, at a university, or if it's a research university, a research group, they can kind of do their own thing. And so part of it is trying to understand even what's going on in the organization, in the institution, and then putting together some structure or framework so that people aren't doing things they shouldn't just because they don't know any better, because they are in some cases they're quasi-independent.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's been what my experience is, that so often the mistakes and the issues that we see are just literally because people didn't know any better. But
Yeah.
the problem is that those mistakes are often they involve risk and decisions about risk that are way above that person's pay grade. Largely because they don't understand the risk that they're dealing with at the time that they're dealing with it. They may know it's a vulnerability, but not necessarily the business impact around
Yeah.
it. And so I do think that that's one of those things that we see a lot. I'd imagine it's everywhere, but in my career and where I've really spent my time has been in IT and of course information security, and I do see that a lot with more junior infosec people, more
Right.
junior IT people. I was that way when I was junior. I can say I was part of the problem at one point in my life. But I like to think that I'm not part of the problem anymore. So
Well, maybe that's part of all of our maturation has become less of a problem over time.
well, in some areas, I think we become more of a problem in other
Sure.
areas, right?
We had one when I first got to the university where, again, a research group, as part of their research grant, had built their own IT infrastructure and no knowledge of security requirements or security practices. And we found out that it was being their server environment, which was open to the World Wide Web, was being used as a host for ransomware attacks at other places, and lovely people that just didn't know any better.
I mean, that's so often how these things happen. I mean, I had a developer. We're a cybersecurity company. You would think we wouldn't have this, but I had a developer trying to open up an SQL management port to the internet, and we do regular security awareness
Sure.
training and OWASP top 10 training for
Yeah.
our developers. But to that point is that, they may hear 90% of what's said in a training, or more likely 10%. But, they may hear some amount, but there's going to be that bit that they miss, and
Yeah.
that ultimately leads to vulnerabilities. And I think that's the reason we put controls around people. To me, that's honestly one of the things that I'm excited the most about with AI. How do we use it to
Yeah.
enhance the human and prevent more human error?
Yeah. I agree.
Uh, like I think it can be little things where it helps out, like when the developer pushes, code to GitHub or whatever, before it gets there, we have AI looking at it
Right.
and saying, "Hey, there's SQL injection
Yeah.
right here," and
Yeah.
literally just proposing the fix, and all that the developer has to do is say, "I approve," and
Yeah.
maybe make a minor modification. Um, I think it's things like that that can really help. Even in email, we're working on a tool where we've trained a large language model on how to identify the underlying psychology. And so
Interesting.
it sits in the user's inbox and
Yeah.
just says, "Hey, watch out for this. It's using urgency. Watch out for this. It's using authority. Watch out for this. There's, sunken
Yeah.
cost." Things like that.
Yeah, that's a great idea because I call it the issue with what I call the lone bonehead. And oftentimes the lone bonehead is not the same bonehead every time. That role rotates around. So somebody who's been trained and has been conscientious historically, that one time they might make a mistake. And like you said, that mistake carries with it potentially a lot of risk for the organization. And so I think as technology professionals and cyber professionals, we need to think about how do I remove the decision making or push the decision making further upstream from the human and reduce the likelihood that the human can make a mistake. And I think that's critical because I think from a threat actor perspective, AI is helping them sharpen their attacks.
Oh,
And so I
it is
think
absolutely.
anything we can do that sharpens our defenses. And like I said, we would, in one of my turnaround roles, we had a fairly large team of software engineers, and we did the security awareness training. We did the simulated phishing attacks, and my software engineers, in spite of their brilliance, as a group, were the worst at failing our simulated phishing attacks than any other group in the entire company, not just in the IT group.
They're absolutely, that's one of the things that we've seen. I mean, I run phishing simulations and training for literally hundreds of thousands of users across the country, and software developers are one of the most at-risk groups. They're right up there with sales.
Yeah.
What I found interesting though is they don't click on the same things at all. And I think that's an important part of it, is understanding that different people click
Right.
on different types of
That's right.
attacks.
Yep.
And to that, I think we can't have these one size fits all phishing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I've found, again, what can I do to reduce my reliance on the person making a good decision? Because it's harder and harder for people to make those good decisions. And if they make a mistake, and it's a mistake, I put at risk the other thousands of people in the organization, or hundreds or thousands or dozens of thousands, whatever it is. And so I just think we need to be, like you are, thinking about how can I reduce the likelihood?
Yeah. Well, I think so. I approach it from two different ways personally, and I'm curious what your thought is here. I believe first and foremost, we want to stop and prevent as much human error as possible, and that's good quality training there that makes that
Yep.
happen. There's a lot of behavioral science around how to make those things more effective. But I think beyond that, then we have to put mitigating controls
Mhm.
around our. We all know who the most common clickers are. I call them chronic clickers. You call them the lone bonehead. But I mean, regardless, we have some level, or I hope we have some level of insight into who those people are. And I think that's where we put those additional mitigating
Yep.
controls around. Ideally, not around everyone, because then
No.
it gets to be so invasive
Exactly.
that things don't
Yep.
work.
Yep. Yeah, I once had, we were doing simulated phishing attacks, and the people who are the serial clickers, the chronic clickers, we would train or do attacks with them more frequently, and then we put some policy around it. I'll never forget, we had somebody in our purchasing group, our procurement group, that it didn't matter how sloppy the simulated phish attack was, she would click. And so finally, I went to her manager and I said, I don't know what to do. He said, I don't either, Neil. We've talked to her multiple times and we just can't get her to stop. I said, are you okay if I just, without telling her, let's take her system access away and see what she does? So, and I'll never forget this, on a Friday afternoon, she called me in a panic, said, I can't get into the ERP system. I said, I know. She said, how do you know? I said, we made sure you can't. And she said, why? I said, you've never seen a phishing attack you didn't love, and you're putting the organization at risk. She said, well, if I don't have system access, I can't do my job. I said, it's clear to us you can't do your job. Now let's talk about how seriously you're going to look at it. And it was that kind of shocked her a little bit. The fact that I think until we took her access away, she didn't recognize, especially working in procurement, the risk she was bringing into the organization. But again, that was one out of thousands of people. And maybe I can deal with one out of thousands in a rather harsh and direct way like that.
So I think that brings up a really good question. So do we use the dunce cap, or do we use the reward? Or what's your approach there? I mean, I know it's not such a black and white area. It really is much more gray. But I'd like to get people's opinions of what's the best approach here. Maybe not as much around the edge cases, and I would consider her to be an edge case.
Yeah, clearly.
I've got that, like I said, hundreds of thousands of users, and there's this one, literally this one that is sort of like that, stands out over everyone.
Yeah.
And I actually got a chance to meet her one day, and because ironically, she works for my investors company, and
Right.
so I was there, and I got to meet her, and she's just like, I'm trying so hard. I just, it's difficult. And what was interesting is she stayed the worst user for like another 6 months, and then all of a sudden she figured it out,
Hmm.
and by no means is our best user, but has gotten so much better. And
Yeah.
so, I think that even that user that you talked about can change their behavior, but often they, like you said, don't understand
Yeah.
how much risk there is.
Yeah. And the carrot and the stick is an interesting question because I'm not sure how you reward people who are good actors. In the past, I've rewarded them by patting them on the head and say, just so you know, don't let your guard down, but we'll pester you less going forward. You're not going to have to deal with this as much. But other than that, I'm not sure how to reward people for good behavior because, to be honest, the vast majority of the employees of the organization have good behavior. They're actually pretty
Yeah.
conscientious about it, except the one time they make a mistake. And then on that case, I think part of it is, and this goes back to my history in lean. The rule in lean is if somebody makes a mistake, you blame and fix the process, not the person. Unless the person makes a repeated mistake, then you think maybe it is the person. And so just looking at that and saying, if you made a mistake, help us understand why rather than blaming somebody so they don't get defensive. Because when they're defensive, they're not going to tell you what really happened. And just how can we refine and improve the process? Help us use this mistake as an opportunity for us to figure out how to error proof our process. And other than that, I really haven't, I haven't figured out the equivalent of the bug bounty
Yeah.
for good end user behavior. And then again on the stick, to me, the stick is help me understand what got you on this one. How can we fix the process? How can we modify the process to reduce this? And then the stick comes out only after it's clear that the person just is struggling as a person rather than with the process. But I'd be open to hearing what other people are doing from a carrot perspective, other than you won't be on the wall of shame. No, I'm using that metaphorically. I joke all the time about the wall of shame, but never actually done it.
Well, they do it at DEF CON. That's always fun. No joke. So if you walk into DEF CON and you leave wireless turned on your phone or even Bluetooth turned on, you're going to show up on the wall of shame.
I've just never found public humiliation I guess would motivate me, but I'm not sure how much it motivates others.
No,
And I think that goes to the point is I think motivation is very individualistic and personal. And so I've just never been able to figure out how to do it as a group.
I've got a couple of ideas around there. Some stuff that we've tried. We did try one time when people didn't click on the phishing simulations, sending them congratulation emails.
Sure.
What we found is that just confused the users because most of the time they didn't click on them. The reason that they didn't click on them had nothing to do with the fact that they were aware. They just didn't see it. They didn't care. They weren't interested, whatever, right? And so then we send them the congrats and they're like, what is this? So we got rid of that. But a couple things that we have found that work are leaderboards, taking that and breaking it down like by department, location, division, within the organization, and doing leaderboards that way and offering
So a
some
wall of fame as opposed to
Yeah.
a wall of shame.
Wall of Fame actually works really well, flipping it on its head. But the other thing that we do is we make sure to congratulate the user and thank them and
Yeah.
literally call them a cyber hero every
Yeah.
time they report a phish.
Yeah.
And I think that's an area where when they report, you just give them the kudos,
I
say
agree.
great job.
And we do that as well.
Yeah, I think that's I don't think the carrot has to be necessarily some big gift or
Yeah,
anything. Just a simple pat on the back
yeah,
goes a long way to building that person's confidence and making them realize that they are capable of understanding
sure.
cybersecurity and that it's not that complex. Because I think that's part of the problem is that Hollywood makes it to be this thing that only a genius can understand. Just saying. They definitely do. So, okay, so we've talked about, uh, carrot versus stick. What about role-based training? I see every day fish come in that are targeting people based on their role.
Mhm. Yep.
What I don't hear a lot of talk about is role-based phishing simulations, and I really don't hear that much talk about role-based training in general, unless it's like card holder, data, handler. I mean, I guess, thankfully, we have a few defined, but to me, I think, roles like developers are critical, roles like IT are
Right.
critical because,
Yep.
man, the mistakes that IT makes are are almost worse than some
Yep.
well, not almost. They're worse than somebody clicking on a fish 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, I agree. And it makes to me it makes a lot of sense because, like you said, you've got certain roles, developers, IT. I think anybody who deals with financial data. Certainly, I've never experienced this, thankfully, but plenty of stories out there where somebody convinced somebody in accounts payable to wire transfer money to somebody that shouldn't have. I've personally experienced somebody who in payroll who shipped off the entire list of everybody's W-2s. And so those types of things
Oh.
happen.
Oh,
Um,
that's a bad one.
yeah, that was what the painful one was. We were aware of this is not quite role based. We were aware of this attack that was going around. So I actually met with the payroll group and told them, be careful. This is going around. And a week later, somebody fell for it.
Oh,
So
no.
yeah, and it's I hate to say it, it's become more commonplace. I asked everyone on my team, how many identity protection services have been offered to you by people you do business with in the last year? And the top was 8. One of the people on my team had 8 identity because 8 providers they did business with that had breaches and losses in some way.
My
But
wife must be close to that for 2024. I swear she got in a different one every month of the
yeah,
year.
it's crazy.
Um, and I mean, that's part of the problem is that we are all, including cybersecurity people, we are
Yeah.
desensitized to these breaches happening because it just happens every day. And now it's like, oh, well, whatever. And I really feel like if there was more consumer fallout
Yeah.
where people said, I'm not going to use you anymore, you
Yeah.
didn't, take good
Yep.
care of my data. I think companies would do better, um, but I don't
Well,
know,
I
there's not
was
a whole lot of consumer fallout either.
yeah, in my non-university role not too long ago, I was helping a company work through a ransomware attack. And at the end, we had negotiated the ransom down to a relatively small number. And there were people on that we were interacting with, attorneys and people on the executive team said, it's not data loss isn't a big deal. I don't think we should pay anything. And I thought to myself, to me, data loss is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, and if you
I
don't
can't
pay the
become
ransom,
acceptable.
I'm not advocating paying the
No.
ransom, but if you don't pay the ransom, they're going to go sell your
Yep.
data, and
Yep.
it makes it that much worse for your users. Now,
Well,
the
and the
flip
point of
side
these
of that
people
is
was it happens so often it doesn't even hurt your reputation anymore.
yeah, I mean, and that really is true. Unless you're like a government
Yeah.
entity, and I mean, even then, what? It wasn't a Department of Treasury or something that was hit last week.
Yeah.
Even then, it's just a tiny little blip on the radar. It's not front page news anymore.
And I hope I'm not desensitized to the point where that becomes acceptable to me. That I can
Same, same. I mean, I guess I might be a little bit because as we talk about it, I'm realizing I am quite desensitized myself. But yeah, I mean, we really do have to worry about it because not only is it getting worse and AI is making the
Sure.
attackers smarter,
Oh, yeah.
like that script kiddie now has Chat GPT to tell them how to be better at their job, at doing what they're
Exactly.
doing.
Yep.
That's a concern.
It
And
is.
and and we've got agents, for sure there have to be agents attacking us by now because
Yep.
I see well, we had an intern, and on their first day of work, they updated their, LinkedIn profile. Within 10 minutes of updating their LinkedIn profile, they were getting a text message claiming to be from me
Yep.
and of course, asking them for gift cards.
Yep.
Um, it was funny because the intern came and asked me, "We're a security awareness company. Don't do that. Your coworkers will never let you live it down." Uh, but aside from the humorous nature of it, it came from a local phone number
Yes.
within
Exactly.
10 minutes,
Yep.
and I was just so impressed, and then, just a few days later, I get a text message from a different local phone number pretending to be him saying, "Hey, I need to update my payroll, had to switch bank accounts." Um, that is
I
pretty
know.
sophisticated.
It is. It very. Yep. So but let's touch on role-based training before we leave that. But I never done it, but as we talk about, it seems like a great idea. So you could target the training if somebody's in procurement, look for anything like this that talks about payables, any that,
Yeah.
hey, I'm switching my bank account, use the following bank account from now on. Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And just teaching people how to verify. Thinking about this, I was the new CIO at a telecommunications company. We got a new CEO at the same time. And somebody on my team, somebody, the equivalent of a service desk technician, got a text message supposedly from the new CEO about the gift card thing. I need an Apple gift card. And he paid for one. And I thought to
Still
myself,
happens. People still fall for them.
yeah. And I thought to myself, okay, so I talked to him and I said, the brand new CEO, there are 8,000 employees of this company. Why? Have you met the new CEO? No. Why would the CEO reach out specifically to you to buy a gift card? The CEO has a staff, members of the executive team. The CEO, I'm guessing, is reasonably well paid and probably has his own credit cards. Anyway, it just the logic train just didn't follow. And I think sometimes people, when they get that authority figure, their response is, "Oh, this is something I must do," rather than just thinking through it.
That's why I think it's really critical that when we train people about cybersecurity and phishing and most specifically the types of attacks that are going to target them, that we focus on making sure they're aware of their own cognitive
Right.
biases.
Yeah.
Things like urgency, things like authority.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think every company should make sure that every new employee signs something that acknowledges, hey, no one's going to ask you to buy gift cards. Don't ever buy them. Um, because that's the reality of it is, I mean, have you
True.
ever heard of a legitimate reason for buying gift cards other than maybe a salesperson running to go get a gift card for a drawing at a show?
Right. Exactly. That's it.
Exactly. That's the only reason. And typically, if I'm telling an employee to get a gift card, they're at the show with me, and it wasn't by
Right.
email.
Yeah, exactly. Or text message.
Exactly. But I mean, it really does. There are so many of these scams that we see all the time. And speaking of roles, students, there's a lot of scams targeting students themselves,
Yep.
particularly those freshmen and sophomores that
Yep.
are new to the world, naive, and don't really realize how vicious it is out there.
Yep. It's true.
Um,
Which is why for us, our cyber tools, we've negotiated contracts that cover students just as part of the typically for almost no cost from the
Yeah.
providers, because they recognize what a diverse and dynamic group it is. And in some cases, they'll never use our tools, but if they want to connect to our network, there are certain steps they're going to have to go through to protect their devices.
Yeah. No, I mean, we do the same thing. We offer all of our training
Yeah,
free to students because, well, A, we understand the schools barely have money to license the faculty,
right.
let alone the students as well. But B, the students are targeted as well,
Yeah,
and it is. I mean, it's different types of fraud though.
it is.
It's hey, I've got a job for you. You
Yep,
need to, buy all of these things in
that's right.
order to get started, or
Yep,
whatever it happens to be.
yep.
Any interesting scams you've heard of or seen on that side?
Not too much on the student side, and we've as the government requirements for the protection of student data have ramped up over the last few years. We've done things like push MFA to student accounts as well, where before we didn't. So we've tried to tighten it up in response to not only the evolving threats, but also the evolving regulatory environment.
Makes sense.
Because
Yeah,
we
when
get
I was
hit
in
with
college, there was no
no,
security on the network. It
no,
was
no.
entirely flat.
Yep.
There's no difference between the student network and the
No.
administrative network. Oh, it was
Yep.
terrible.
Exactly right. Yeah, and we've seen we're a research institution, and so we get the standard Department of Education stuff, but then also the requirements and regulations from the research side of life. And then there's a sliver of the university that does Department of Defense research, and that has its own set of regulations as well. But to be
Yeah, that was
honest,
going to be my next question. So, do you have CMMC requirements now?
we do for the Department of Defense stuff. But to be honest, it's been, I hate to say this, it's been nice in a decentralized organization that sometimes doesn't pay attention to cyber. It's been nice to use these evolving and more stringent requirements and regulations as a wedge to improve compliance and participation.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, the compliance is the stick that we can't ignore.
Absolutely.
Because there's a stick that'll hit us over the head as technology professionals if we don't do,
Yep.
at least some sort of bare minimum within the organization.
Yeah.
And so, like, I work with a lot of state and local
Mhm.
government, and they've got a lot of people that really don't use email.
Yeah.
And but they still have to do training. They still have their, accounts that they have to get into to, for
Yep.
all the normal stuff. And so in order for them to remain compliant, almost all of them once a year have to go disable a bunch of accounts, have them come in, sit down at a kiosk, do their training in order to do it. And the issue is, it's not that they're ignoring, it's that they check their email once a year when they're told to because their account gets shut off.
Exactly. Yep. Oh yeah, we have that. We have a lot of that goes on, especially because we one of our practices is with student accounts, because we have students that'll go on hiatus and come back. We keep student accounts active for a certain period of time. Same if somebody on the staff or faculty leaves, we keep their accounts open for a period of time. And it's so you're dealing with people who may not be paying attention
Yeah,
to the services they're using.
exactly. Well, I know we're running a little bit low on time. We're not out of time yet, but we are running a little bit low. And one of the things that I think is the most important when talking about just the human element in technology and cybersecurity is the best practices or tips that you've learned around the year to really drive better culture change. It's a keyword that everyone talks about, but how do we actually do it?
I've spent my career doing these large scale transformations, whether it's, like I said, modernization, new systems, cyber posture and culture. And I learned while doing this, that it's rarely about the technology. It's more about how it touches the human. And so I learned a motto years ago that served me well in how I approach the human behavior side of life. The motto is this: as humans, we prefer the familiar to the comfortable, and the comfortable to the better. So given our choice, we prefer the familiar to the comfortable, comfortable to the better. Well, if I want to change the behavior to embrace the better, I need to make it both comfortable and familiar. So how do I do that? Things like we've been talking about: training, sitting down with people, explaining to them the risks associated with certain behaviors, helping articulating the why, but then also setting things up in a way where they can get early access, early looks, do pilots. I've done things like, let's start with this group with this new either practice or process or technology, and invite the rest of the groups to observe and see. And over communicating, one of my other mottos is, in the absence of communication, people assume the worst. So I never go dark. Even if it's bad news, I share the bad news, because when people don't know what's going on, they tend to ignore or think the worst. So one of the things we've been very
True.
good
All of
about,
them, almost all of human creativity
yes,
is just around assuming the worst.
worst. Absolutely. So one of the changes we made at the university was, if we have an incident, we talk about it, we communicate it. We obviously protect the identities of the person, the lone bonehead. We don't name the lone bonehead, no wall of shame. But at the same time, here's what happened. Here's why it happened. Here's why it shouldn't happen again. And just be obvious. And I think part of it goes into, as well as storytelling, tell the story. Because people remember the story. And so tell the story about the person who made the mistake, not about the person, but who made the mistake, because that makes it more personal for the other people at the organization that are reading about it. Ooh, I once did that. Now, I didn't have the same outcome, but boy, I better be careful going forward.
Yeah, I once had a pen test where we were able to make our way into a bank vault unaccompanied. No one knew. And as a result, this VP ends up getting fired. But what I found the most interesting was that first year, just massive human vulnerabilities, but this
Sure.
wasn't a huge bank. And so that next year and the year after it, nothing. They didn't even fall for a fish because what had happened was so high profile,
Oh,
so
yeah.
visible,
Yeah.
because they were all in on it. They had all met the guy that was updating their
Yeah.
email and
Right.
and fallen for it and not found out that, who I actually was until, we come in to actually do the internal pen test. And that's when they realized. But to me, the big takeaway was that when users, not as much us, but when users talk about and spread these stories, it's just
Yep.
phenomenally good for building
Yep.
that overall awareness.
I agree.
I think that's part of the reason that phishing simulations are important, and not the one size fits all. Because in one size fits all, the talking defeats itself, right? Where people go and warn everybody, hey, they're phishing. But if everyone gets a different fish at a different time, now when people go to warn everybody, hey, they're fishing, all we're doing is creating really good awareness around it.
Yeah, I agree.
So
And the thing I've always done with my teams is I tell them, I have yet to fall for any of your phishing simulations. I'm throwing down the gauntlet. Do your best, but I will win. And that's so it's created this competitive approach to it, where they're really working hard to disguise them and personalize them and do whatever they can, because I think that benefits the entire organization when they're trying to defeat me, the person who's confronting them, saying you can't beat me. Anyway, I've had a great time with
I like it.
my cyber teams.
I like it. Maybe I'm gonna have to do the same thing in my company. I actually almost fell for one that I created myself one time.
That's a
To
little embarrassing.
Well, it was to target people like me. I was like, "Well, what would get me to click?" And so this is before the LastPass breach, and I'm like, well, a LastPass master password reset phish might get me to have that emotional gut reaction and click before I did anything.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, like 6 months later, this fish hits me, and I almost fall. I mean, I was half a second, maybe a
Oh, yeah.
millisecond away from actually clicking on it. Um,
I love it.
so I think it's a great practice having them do that. And to your point about starting with why, rewinding a little bit, one of the things that I think is so critical around why to make that effective is not just connecting it to their home life, but also connecting it to their role within the
Oh, yeah.
organization. They did a study that found that when you make training contextual to somebody's job, it's 15 times more effective.
Mm, interesting.
Which I think the reason is because otherwise it's just random cybersecurity,
Yeah.
and they think, well, this is I think they think 2 things. A, this is too complex for me to understand is often one of the thoughts, but I think the other one is, I don't need to worry about this.
Yeah.
It's not my job.
Yeah.
And we know that's the case because there was a university in South Florida that did a study that found that there's a certain percentage of every group, and any company large enough anyway, that will actually email any suspicious email to their work email and open it there because they think it's so secure they can't get hacked. Yeah, yeah. If you didn't know that, that's what'll keep you up tonight.
Oh boy. Well, it's not getting easier, which means we need to make it easier for our people to not make a mistake. Ultimately,
Agreed. But I think that's where AI is gonna help a lot.
I agree.
And I
Yep.
think for the first time, thanks to AI, and it relies on people actually adopting AI from a defensive perspective. But for the first time, I think we have the opportunity to catch up
Yeah.
and actually really compete with the bad guys and not just, always be playing the catch up game like we have been.
Yeah. When I talk to other organizations about AI, I've been doing AI for 20-ish years. And I tell them, I say, your initial use of AI might be what I call embedded AI, the AI that's embedded in products you already use. And one of your first use cases you may want to look at is, what is the AI that's being used by your cyber providers? And how good is that? And get good at validating their models, validating how they're using it, because you need to learn how to validate AI and the data and all the stuff with it. But
And
it's a
just
great use
understanding how
case
they
for,
work. There's
yeah,
a lot of different types of
there
AI.
is. Yep.
And I mean, even with us, we've got multiple different types of AI under
Yep.
the hood. So
Yep.
just asking us that question even doesn't really necessarily fully answer the question.
No,
And
no,
as more agents come into the picture, it's only going to get worse.
I know. Yep.
I don't know about you. I'm excited about
I
AI.
am too. I tell people we live at exciting times.
We do.
This is to me the most exciting thing since Al Gore invented the internet. So we'll see how it all shakes out.
We're invented the internet. I had forgotten about that. Wow. Blast
You're
from the
almost
past.
you're almost too young to remember that.
Oh, no, I do remember that though. But wow, yeah, no, that's it's funny. Well,
It's exciting though. This is we're seeing rapid change
we are. It's
where the
blowing up.
role of technology gets more and more critical and more important in the organization. I tell you, it's the best time in the history of mankind to be a technology leader. It really is.
I think we'll hit singularity this year. And hey, I mean, singularity, we're not far off. It's just
No,
smarter than a human. And well, depending on the human, we might already be there.
that's true. I guess it depends which human we start with as our baseline.
Let's at least use somebody decently smart. So all right. Well, hey, thank you for joining us.
I appreciate the time.
Any words before we end the episode?
No, I would just say think about how to push risk mitigation further upstream, and then how to prepare the people, the humans, the behaviors for what's certainly going to become higher quality attacks.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. Well, hey, thank you for joining us
Thank you.
today. And thank you everybody that joined remotely for for joining us for another episode